It's my pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Elaine Willman, Masters in Public Administration, author of Going to Pieces, The Dismantling of the United States of America. First came out in 2005. This book reports on first-person visits and experiences of, wait for it, tribal members and citizens residing on or near 17 Indian reservations during her extensive road trip across the country from Washington State to New York State. Subsequent to her 2-year attendance at Ventura College of Law, she received a master's degree in public administration from Cal State University in 91, has obtained 96 credits toward her doctoral work in public policy. Having lived in the western states for over 30 years and within 2 Indian reservations for more than 20 years, Ms. Willman has extensive knowledge about federal Indian policy, land use status within Indian reservations, dual jurisdiction, and constitutional conflicts that impact the rights and lives of tribal members as well as other American citizens. Her mother and grandmother were enrolled Cherokee members. Her spouse is of Shoshone ancestry and is a direct descendant of Sacagawea. I think I've got that right, maybe not. She served as National Chair of Citizens Equal Rights Alliance from 2001 to 2007 and remains an active SARA board member, that's CERA. Ms. Willman has blended her local land use and strategic planning expertise with federal Indian policy to inform and engage counties, towns, and citizens that are co-located within or near federally recognized Indian reservations. From 2008 to 15, that's 2015, Ms. Willman served the Village of Hobart, Wisconsin as their Director of Community Development and Tribal Affairs. Hobart, incorporated in 1908, after the Oneida tribe of Indian reservations was fully allotted, is entirely co-located within the historical boundaries of this former reservation. Now, this is something we haven't talked about on this program ever, but I think this is going to yield some really good things. Last year, Ms. Willman moved to the Flathead Indian Reservation to assist farmers and cattlemen, landowners, and irrigators that have had their access to water taken over by a tribal government. So, in other words, we have tribal government expansion supplanting state authorities over lands, landowners, and citizens. And nobody seems to know a thing about it. But Elaine does, and welcome to the program. It's good to have you with us. This is something that, if you'll excuse the expression, really came out of left field. I was reading this, and I thought, what? The only thing we ever hear about the Native Americans is they're heavily invested into the gambling business, and you can go up to Thackerville, just across the Texas-Oklahoma line, and see some great shows at some of their casinos. But other than that, I mean, I don't remember the last time anybody remembered a reservation. I can't believe we can even say Indian reservation anymore anyway. So that's a long-winded intro, Elaine, but I'm glad you're with us. How are you?
I'm fine, John, and I really loved your intro because your impression and your experience with Indian reservations is the same as probably most Americans. They have this dancing with wolves impression of Indian reservations, or they think, as you said, about the tribal casinos. And that's why it's such a pleasure to be on your show. I want to talk and put as much as I can in the sunshine, because federal Indian policy, our government decisions, has nothing to do with tribal members and culture. My respect for tribal member and culture. These are government decisions that are affecting every American taxpayer, and certainly millions of Americans that are not tribal members that live on Indian reservations. Most folks think that there are reservations out there with teepees, and they sit in some big vacuum, and they have no idea that every single reservation in the United States is co-located within counties, towns, cities, some very big urban areas on the Washington coast, Oregon coast, California. So we have a dual jurisdiction problem, and it is a completely federally subsidized problem. There are 566 tribal governments, each of whom receives annual funding for their housing, their education, their tribal courts, their law enforcement, their health. All basic services are funded by American taxpayers times 566 every year.
Good grief.
Yeah.
Only
So when you do
566 individual
yeah,
tribal governments.
yes, and the former commissioner of the Bureau of Indian Affairs is trying to collapse the recognition criteria for tribes because there are 400 more lined up wanting their federal recognition for their casinos and their federal taxpayer subsidies. This is an enormous, enormous debt on the American taxpayer that nobody knows about. I had the experience of being at a national conference 5, 6 years ago, and a fellow named George Scabine, who was the go-to guy at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, George gave a lovely keynote address, marveling at the majesty of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and then he opened it up for Q&A, and one of the folks in the audience said, Mr. Scabine, has the Bureau of Indian Affairs ever audited all the money that comes from 29 federal agencies out to 566 tribes? Has that ever been audited at all? And he said, well, we tried once, but we can't do that. We just can't do that. And the second follow-up question was, don't you think it's a good idea that the taxpayers know how many dollars come out from 29 federal agencies every year to 566 tribal governments? And he says, no, I don't think that's necessary. So this is the best kept secret, and it is absolutely off limits to mainstream media. Mainstream media is controlled by casino advertising, by political correctness. If you discuss out loud what's really happening on these Indian reservations, you're a racist. If tribal members, if they disagree with a tribal government decision, they are punished. It's just an amazing tapestry across this country that is now being spread. And the reason this is so critical, John, and especially in 2016, is because of recent policy actions under the Obama administration. Now, Mr. Obama did not create this stuff. It was on a good roll for many decades, but he has added steroids to it. He's bringing in and encouraging and now facilitating the merging of domestic tribal cultures with Middle Eastern tribal cultures. And I'll address that a little later on, but I think for your listeners, and I think it's important to understand a couple of things. First, I'm only speaking for myself. I want to make that really clear. I'm affiliated with many organizations, and as you said, I'm the author of Going to Pieces. But I'm going to give you my experience over 25 years. I lived on the Yakima Reservation for 16 years, the former Oneida Reservation for 8 years, and now I'm out here in the middle of a huge problem on the Flathead Indian Reservation in western Montana. I think that if I can take just a few minutes to kind of run through history, we're a very young country. We're a very young country, and we have learned by skinning our knees. We've done a lot of things wrong, and we've done a lot of things right. We originally had our little 13 colonies. Within those 13 colonies, there was no federal government and no federal lands when we became the United States, and we consisted of 13 colonies. The Indian reservations in those 13 colonies were state reservations controlled by the state. As the country is getting settled and the East Coast is filling up and the Louisiana Purchase is acquired in 1803, Congress, for whatever reasons it determined, decided that the Indians needed to be moved west of the Mississippi, and that was the 1830 Indian Removal Act, moving the Indian tribes and Indians west of the Mississippi. The year of 1855. First, I'd like folks to kind of visualize, if they can, and as they're listening, what the country looked like in 1855. We had several states on the eastern side of the country formed up, and we had a lot of federal territory, the Louisiana Purchase and all the way out to California, a lot of federal territory in 1855, and a few states had been formed up. But this year of 1855, I want to talk about that because American mindset bears such shame and guilt. And of course, the shame and guilt is marketed. It's really, really marketed. We're supposed to be shamed for the rest of our life in perpetuity, by golly.
Yeah.
And I've never understood how we as American citizens can be so absolutely proud of our country, but have such a low self-esteem that we just take on guilt, false guilt,
Well,
and it
that's what
gets
got
slathered
Obama in
on
office to start with, Elaine.
with this process. I'm sure you get that.
Oh yeah,
You know,
that's why
an example.
that's why
Yeah,
Obama's in office, is guilt.
absolutely, absolutely. The guilt and shame and the divisiveness, it has never been worse than it is right now. Such things
Hold
as,
your thought and
oh,
let me get a sense of scale here. How
sure,
many Native Americans do we reckon there are in the continental, just the continental United States? We can do all 50 states if you want, but I mean,
we're 2%.
what size is the group anyway?
Well, that this is why this is such an amazing hoax. 2%. I think we're 330 million or 323 million Americans, people in the country. 2% are
Gotcha.
American Indians.
Okay.
And out of those 2%, 3 out of 4 American Indians left the reservation. They're not there. There's only 1 out of 4 that are enrolled tribal members among these 566 tribal governments. Very small enrollment numbers. Can you imagine this money for a fraction of 2% of our census?
How much money?
Nobody knows, John. Nobody knows. We have tried to find out. Originally, prior to a Clinton executive order, funding only came from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But Clinton created an executive order, 13175, during the Clinton administration, requiring all federal agencies to have a tribal office and to perpetually consult with Indian tribes for anything the federal government was doing within in or near Indian reservations, and to include these Indian tribal reservation needs in their federal budgets, all 29 of them. Clinton's the one that blew it up to not just funding from the BIA, but now you have, for example, from the Department of Transportation, you have the Indian Reservation Roads Program. When they don't have any roads, they're all state and county roads. But we have an Indian Reservation Roads Program that pushes billions out for Indian roads. And as I said, there's almost no Indian roads, but they get big money for Indian roads on county and state and local roads. And it's not necessarily merged with, it's not fixing county and state roads, but they got the money.
And you can't just go driving into these reservations, can you? Isn't this sort of a restricted property, or you can drive in there?
No. From the time that Indian treaties on reservations back in 1855, those treaties all required that public roads be opened and maintained, and the state had jurisdiction over public roads through Indian reservations. They've always been open. They were opened up for settlement. This was all going away in the late 1880s. So yes. For example, the village of Hobart that I worked for 8 years is a major suburb of Green Bay. Go Packers! and it's very urban. And Hobart is basically a bedroom city. There's no downtown Hobart, so it relies entirely on its property taxes. But it's a big urban area. You have 31 tribes in Washington State, the bulk of which are on the coast of Washington State, all around Seattle, Bellingham, Tacoma. These Indian reservations are in big urban areas in many cases. There are out in the Midwest, less populated, like the large Navajo reservation. There's only 2 Indian reservations that I know of in the country that are predominantly Indian. They're all very much predominantly non-Indian. And they're all served by their county and state governments and local municipalities. And then layered over that, you have these small tribal governments, small tribal populations, huge budgets. Example, when I first hired on in January 2008 with the village of Hobart, they were getting badly bullied because tribal governments with their constitutions have no authority over non-tribal people or lands. But the Oneida tribe was badly bullying the local municipal government, Hobart. So